Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the Tuesday Times Roundtable. As I mentioned previously when I did not know I was on camera, this is our last TTR of the semester, but we've got an exciting lineup for you for the spring with all new speakers and totally different topics. So it'll be definitely worth your while to make sure to look out for our schedule. So each week we engage in conversation about current global issues, trends, problems, and opportunities that are of interest to you, our FIU students and family. Our weekly Tuesday Times Roundtable is made possible with a formal partnership with the New York Times. So here on the screen is the link for you to activate your free account. That's free online access. And this partnership also brings us once a year a New York Times guest speaker to FIU, and it provides us, students, faculty, and staff with this free digital access to the newspaper. Those of you who are writing papers for your courses, as Laura had to do recently, the articles in the New York Times are excellent resources for the kinds of writing that you need to do. So I am Anna Prado. I am the graduate assistant in the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. With me, as always on Tuesdays, are my colleagues, Sherry Beeson, who is your regular lovely co-host, and the Senior Program Coordinator at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, and Michelle Zaldivar, our Program Coordinator, who is graciously connecting those of you attending via Zoom. Together, we welcome you to today's session. Whether you're joining us in person, don't forget to get your lunch ticket. If you're joining us live via Zoom, or if you're watching this recording after we've all left the room. I'd like to give a special shout out to any of FIU's own Peace Corps prep students who I hope are joining us today. I think today's session will be especially relevant for you, and I'm really glad to be able to present you our speaker today, Ms. Jamilette Marzo, who we'll talk about in just a second. If you're joining us as a Global Learning Medallion student, please remember that you can earn 1 point for today's session. And if you are wondering what the Global Learning Medallion program is, please stick around afterwards and you can speak to Sherry, Michelle, or myself. And we'd love to talk to you about the medallion, the Peace Corps prep program, or other opportunities that our office helps make available to students. Later during our sessions, we will be taking your questions. Sherry and I will be coming around with microphones so that you can ask your questions live. And if you are joining us via Zoom, you can pop the questions in the chat, and Michelle will be monitoring that for you. So let's get this party started. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about GlobeMed, but I think it's better if Michelle does that for us. So if Michelle, if you are available to talk about that for a moment.
Absolutely. So GlobeMed is a student-run organization here on campus that focuses on global health equity, health being one of the key sectors of the Peace Corps, so it was particularly relevant to highlight here. We are absolutely in a rebuilding year. We are looking for leadership and initiatives to take on campus, so if global health equity is something that interests you, that piques your interest, please go ahead and scan that QR code. Submit your contact information to us, and existing GlobeMed members will reach out to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you today's guest, who is Jamilette Marzo, who is an FIU alum, a returned Peace Corps volunteer, and a lifelong believer in global service. Jamilette Marzo is the Vice President of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of South Florida, and she is an FIU alumni from 2017 who shortly after graduation served in the Peace Corps from 2018 to 2020. She served in, and I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly and I'm going to apologize ahead of time, I'm going to try, Guizhou, China? Guizhou, not even close, wow. As a TEFL University educator, this is why global learning is important. Her time and the conversations that she had while in service allowed her to reflect upon the importance of a global service as the bridge to connecting diverse cultures. Since her return to the States, Jamilette has been working as a curriculum instructor at a low-income school in Homestead, Florida. Today, we are thrilled to have Jamilette with us to discuss the question, require a year of national service? A New York Times opinion letter which lets us look at and discuss the topic of a call to national service. Questions that we may talk about today is how would a call to national service or even global service alter the way we perceive people? But more importantly, other cultures throughout the world. Would this be a potential step towards inclusion or cultural diversity? So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome our speaker for today, Ms. Jamilette Marzo.
All right. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamilette Marzo. I will be talking a little bit about myself shortly, and I would also like to get into our discussion for today, which is require a year of national service. This article was an opinion letter found in the New York Times. It was a May issue. So if you have access to it, it'd be great if you can pull that up for those of you at home and, quickly browse through it before we start. Thank you. All right. So a little bit about myself. All right. My name is Jamilette Marzo. I am an FIU alumni. I graduated from FIU. I majored in international relations with a second major in anthropology and a minor in geography. So as you can see from a get-go, for me, international relations and commuting and learning about different cultures and different people and countries was always on my mind. Shortly after graduating, just about really shortly after graduating, I decided to teach because I wanted to join the Peace Corps. The reason for this was because I wanted to learn about different countries and be not just a visitor, but be also someone that is implemented and embedded into different countries' culture, different countries' structure. So I wanted to know more about the country that I was going to be working in. So I decided to take up a year teaching. I taught history at another low-income school in Hialeah. And then I set off to the Peace Corps. I was stationed in China from 2018 to 2020. So yes, I was recently evacuated from China. During my time in China, I taught in Guizhou, which is in the southwest part of China. And in that area, the city that I taught in was it was a rural city. We had about 23 ethnic minorities that lived in that city. Well, especially throughout the whole province, but I had a lot of ethnic minority students. So for them, not only was English a foreign language, but Mandarin, or standard form of Mandarin, was also kind of something that they were just also getting the whole educational and the whole academic standard of Mandarin. So I would have some discussions in class when, I'd give out instructions on certain work, and some of my students, even within the class, sometimes would have difficulties understanding each other because of the different dialects that were spoken. So I was not alone. I felt like I was not alone. Sometimes they couldn't understand each other. They couldn't understand me. Sometimes I couldn't understand them, but we tried to work through it. What we did realize at the end is that aside from our differences, we are more alike than anything. All right, the concept of family, of culture, of community exists, right? And these familial ties are really, really embedded in places like China, whereas here in the United States, we don't really see that sort of familial ties. We see a lot more of independence, and we see a lot more of individualism, whereas in China, people focus on community, on family, and that was one of my takes from my time in China. All right. Upon my return, I decided to go to DC because that's where I wanted my next venture to be. I wanted to go to grad school in DC. I wanted to work there. I wanted to set up life there. Unfortunately, the pandemic followed me home. So I was now faced with, I couldn't go to DC because I didn't have job security was scarce during that time. Grad school, I'm gonna have to set that aside, and so I decided to come home to Miami. All right, so I came back home. I stayed with my mother during the time of the pandemic, but I did go visit my friends often in DC, and on one of the trips, that we had out in DC happened to be the Peace Corps Day of Advocacy in DC. I decided to join. I met fellow returned Peace Corps volunteers. All right, and in my group, one of the Peace Corps volunteers happened to be the acting vice president of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of South Florida, who is an amazing person. All right, he's the current president of the Returned Peace Corps of Florida. His name is Dave Garcia, and he brought me on board and told me, you know, this would be a great home for me and a great fit. And sure enough, it was, which has led me to also work with other projects that we have coming up. We have Everglade outing that the Returned Peace Corps volunteers do, and it's something that we put together with the Chapman's partnership, and as well as, I believe, I forgot the name of, I'm sorry, I apologize, I forgot the name of the other partnerships of the other non-for-profit organizations that we work with. We work with a lot of inner city kids, and we take them out to the Everglades and arrange a field trip for them. We teach them about different types of trails. We get the park rangers involved. So it is a lot of what I would have liked to continue doing abroad, but back home. A lot of giving back to the community, a lot of community service, a lot of working with underprivileged. All right, let's continue. So I talked about the Peace Corps, and many of you may or may not know what the Peace Corps is. So I'm going to give you a brief summary about the Peace Corps. All right, the Peace Corps was created by John F. Kennedy. All right, and so on his famous speech that he said, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And it is with this mentality that the Peace Corps was established in 1961. It was established to promote world peace and friendship through the service of American volunteers abroad. In adapting to changing needs around the world, the Peace Corps remains guided by 3 goals. These 3 goals are to help the people of interested countries in meeting their need for trained men and women, to help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people served, and to help promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of all Americans. And this 3rd goal, as a returned Peace Corps volunteer, is something that I myself, being back home, decided to take upon, of making sure that wherever it is that I go, people know that my experience, my story, and my experience with different cultures and the diversity and inclusion that took place during this time. All right. The Peace Corps has had, in the past 50 years, more than 215,000 Americans, all right, that have furthered these goals, and they've served in over 139 countries around the world. Volunteers are the foundation of the Peace Corps, coming from every background and traveling to the far reaches of the globe to share skills and promote mutual understanding. All right. So, heading back to our original topic for this afternoon, should a year of national service be mandatory? The opinion letters found in the New York Times article illustrate a very point of view on public for towards mandatory service. So let's see some of these opinions that came up. All right. The ones that we showed in favor, we had, what better way to build community and the economy than for every 18-year-old to know that on attaining the age of majority or graduating from high school, he or she, they will be expected to enroll in a nationwide service program. Enrollees could make ranked choices among the various options, serving in the military or in the environment, infrastructure, education, childcare, or healthcare fields. One of the opinions that we found that were opposed to suggested that there are plenty of ways for people to volunteer their services to their local communities, should they so desire. That is all to the good. What we don't need is a conscript of army of social workers helping local communities, whether they like it or not, via the commands of federal bureaucracy. These bureaucracies will inevitably be captured by interest groups with parochial interest. All right. We had a report that came out by the Service Year Alliance that was published, offering guidelines for how President Biden could currently reconceptualize national service to meet his administrative policies or priorities. Right? They believed that a service year experience offers younger generations, particularly opportunity youth and recent high school graduates, the opportunity and time to learn about their strengths while aligning their skills and experiences to future education and career goals. National service affords younger generations a year-long opportunity to navigate a professional experience in a supportive environment, alleviating some of the pressures that occur in the first job experience, and also giving students to take that time, that year off, before they decide exactly what it is that they want to do with the rest of their lives. Additionally, it is said that national service cultivates social capital development and gives agency to younger generations to drive professional development and active participation in their personal economic mobility. A brief published by the Aspen Institute titled Voters for National Service, Perspectives of American Voters on Large-Scale National Service had the following findings provided by the Hart Research. All right, these findings were American voters have a positive view of national service and a broad understanding of what the term national service means. So most people do understand what the term national service means. And for those of you at home that may not know, national service is usually a period of time of volunteer provided to your country, depending on what sector. It could be military, it could be throughout the infrastructure, it could be educational, it could be public sector. So it is a time of just looking at the needs of your community and addressing them in a sense that there is no income or different types of benefit tied to it. All right. Our second key finding was when asked what goals they have for our country, voters see many pressing needs and think that country could do more. All right. Here is a chart that we looked at that looks at our country should be doing a lot more in this certain area, and that's the one that we have fine in blue, or that people found that the country should be doing somewhat more. But all together, they believe that 86% of the country created a greater sense of individual responsibility for improving community in the country. This is what their beliefs are of national service, of a mandatory national service. All right. They also, 83% give young people more ways to earn money to pay for college. All right. Another 83% believe that pathways to help prepare people for professional jobs were currently shortages. All right. 81% more citizens' involvement in solving our country's most pressing problems. All right. Currently, right now with COVID and what is going on, there's been a shortage in many different sectors of our infrastructure. And because of this, I don't know if any of you are aware, but the president has signed, along with AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, and FEMA have been working to fill in these shortages. And they're doing it as volunteers. 79% believe that work learning opportunities for young people when they first get out of high school and college. So this is a really important platform. 78% believe that helping young people out of school or work reconnect to education and employment. So they do believe that national service is something good. It is influential. It is beneficial for opportunity youth. All right. The last two key findings that the Aspen Institute found after their brief, they believe that voters overwhelmingly favor a system of voluntary national service but oppose mandatory service, in which more than 70% of people supported one-year voluntary-based national service. Once again, the voters and the people from this poll believed that mandatory service should not exist, that a voluntary-based service, minimum of 1 year, should exist if opportunity youth or kids fresh out of high school were interested in, and the ages ranged, all right? So they believed between 18 to 25 was a good age range for people to volunteer if they wanted to. Key finding number 4, believe that voters say that the country and national service participants would benefit greatly in a variety of ways from a national service program. All right. And the final points from the New York Times opinion letter states that if service is so personally and socially beneficial, why not include everyone? Isn't it awfully convenient when the people advocating programs of forced labor would never be subject to those programs themselves? Our final opinion, I wholeheartedly support the idea of 1 year of mandatory service. Decades ago, my wife and I were Peace Corps volunteers in Uganda. We learned so many life lessons and had so many life experiences. But most important, we learned not to take our country and our life in this amazing country for granted. I think all of us need to have that. So, I'd like to leave you guys with some takeaway questions from our opinion polls from this New York Times opinion letter on today's topic, should a year of national service be required, right? Could this possibly be one of the solutions to a polarized world we are currently living in? All right, if so, how many years of national service should be required? What should be the age range? What benefits should the national government provide? Is there a stipend, accessibility to grants, fellowship, loans, all right? What sectors should volunteers work in? If not, why would people feel opposed? What are some of the deterrents to a mandatory year of national service? So these are some takeaways that I'd like for you guys to think about before we open the floor to discussion and questions. So I'd like to give you guys a couple minutes to jot down some notes, some questions.
If you already have a question or you want to respond, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll come around to you.
Okay. So question from the Zoom space. This idea of local versus national versus international service. In the discussion of this, right, should this be mandatory? Should it be like a conscription? In your personal opinion, where do you think some of the most benefits lie, right? Because I know Peace Corps is international service, right? And learning opportunities there, I mean, needless to say, we're coming from the Office of Global Learning here, right? But some of those like cost benefits, where do you think the strengths would be if this was required?
If we're looking at cost benefits, I would definitely say national, a system of national voluntary service where we look at even locally, work with our inner city kids, work in the different types of community needs, because locally there's a lot of things that fall in between the cracks. There's a lot of need for a lot of different types of professionalism, even voluntary work for right here in our own backyards. And I believe that if we actually take a step back and look at it, we will see the different types of also cultural diversities and social inequality that are right in our backyard. So I would like, perhaps, if it were up to me, a local system of mandatory government serving in our own backyards.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. So honestly, thinking about this, I volunteer, well, I'm applying for the Peace Corps, so I definitely want to join. So I do have the national service in mind that it could be beneficial, one for our country, and I really like the second question where could it be a possible solution for a polarized world? However, we still need to ask like the question: what happens to kids that didn't grow up in a very good neighborhood, or they were impoverished or low income? Why should they serve for their country if their country didn't benefit them in any way? And there's two factors to this, right? Like, what if you do serve as a national service and then you do grow for a love for your country because you could give back to kids that were like you? So I guess it's like a two-part question. It's very complex. However, I do see a benefit in a national service just because, like, I do think it could show people different perspectives and understand their community more, or other communities that they didn't understand before. So yeah, I just wanted to open the floor to that one because that's been rattling in my head.
Okay, that is an interesting topic that you bring up. One of the white paper briefs that I posted on the works site, it's a long brief. It's about 27 pages. But if you go and follow that brief, it talks about the different type of people that, especially that mandatory voluntary service would focus in on. And a lot of it is opportunity youth. Why? Because they want to focus on the kids that they feel would actually benefit the most out of it. Kids that perhaps coming out of that year or two of service of required voluntary work would have benefits, could possibly have grants, could possibly have loans, could possibly come out with a lot of work experience that would give them kind of an even playing field with the rest of their peers.
So in this scenario, right, would it be a voluntary service or would it be mandatory? Because if it was voluntary, then the kids that did grow up in a good neighborhood or did come of higher income, they would just go straight into school and then be one step ahead. So if this was to happen, shouldn't it be a mandatory service so everybody?
Of course, it would probably be. This is why all these articles look at required service. So it's not, they look at it voluntarily as a possibility, but their main focus is on a mandatory national service.
So I appreciate what you said because it's a very good point. And then going back to the quote from JFK that was saying, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I think the first thought I had on that was the benefit for those people who did grow up in very difficult homes and did not have access to resources. I think the benefit for them to serve would be breaking that cycle for future generations and saying, I know I suffered, I'm not going to let my community suffer anymore, and I'm going to sacrifice and take that step to make future generations have the opportunities that I didn't have. So I think that would be the benefit, but I think it would take personal courage to set aside all the things that they missed out on and all the things that were unfair and unjust in order to bring that justice back to where it should be. So that was my thought on that, but yeah.
No, you do raise a good point. But then the question, like how you said, still lies, like how do we persuade people to actually volunteer or sign up for a mandatory service? Because right now we have volunteer options all the time. You could volunteer your local shelter or even at a school or something like that, but people don't. So how would you persuade them in a way like to actually participate in this?
Definitely by looking at what benefits the national government would provide as far as stipend living, as far as you come out of it with a type of fellowship, grants, probably some sort of college scholarships as well, with maybe even internships opportunity that come out of this. So there would be a lot for anyone who would be pondering about the topic of putting together a required national year of service look at.
Wanted to respond to one of your statements. So if we're looking at people from low-income communities, we also should raise the question of, first of all, we're privileged in a university, in an institution, knowing about this resource. But if you're coming from a low-income community, how would you even know of this resource, that it's even available for you to do? So that's another cycle, part of the circle. So how do we raise awareness and give them this resource or knowledge of the opportunity?
All right, so you bring a very valid point of view, and that is something that if it's going to be government mandated, it would obviously be implemented into the educational sector. So schools would be promoting it. It would be part of like the agenda, even curriculum, just like FIU has now a PC prep program. Perhaps, high schools could start a certain program that looked at volunteerism and getting them prepared for perhaps serving as a volunteer in their own nation.
As an extension of the similar thought, coming from a almost stereotypical view, understanding of what the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, which is our national service, would be like, if the only impression that you have of it is from the movies, right? And it's like the older sister went away to the Peace Corps for 3 months and now she's back. The stereotype there, or the underlying understanding, is that it's only people of means that do go, right? That don't feel like they're missing out on that year where they have to contribute to their family's income, or they need to take that extra step to get their education and further education, and that service, I'm going to air quotes around this, would be a waste of that time and things that they can contribute to their own families and their own local communities. I feel like that is 100% a stereotype. But if you could speak to your own experience and the kinds of people that you served with, and what that population was like and that experience was like, I think that would be really insightful.
Sure. Speaking from my own experience, I am a first-generation college graduate. Right? I'm a first-generation college graduate. I come from a background in my family was low to middle income. All right, so it was hard. Both parents working, even like my siblings working as part-time jobs to get through school. And it was a tough decision for me to make, should I take a year off from perhaps helping out and being in addition to my family income, or would this be a great opportunity for me? And I discussed it with my mom, my dad, and, she told me that would be actually the most beneficial decision I could take as a person, individual person, family aside. And I did it. I felt like it was the best decision I've ever made. Okay. I learned a lot about myself, a lot about the people that I served with. All right. And not everyone, yes, there were some people that you would say were of means, okay, that I served with, but there were also other middle class kids, basically. I would say kids, some of them were fresh out of college, had a year training. They had worked in different types of volunteer and service, tutoring and stuff while in undergrad. But I did work with a lot of people that I fell in line with my belief systems, and our backgrounds were pretty similar. We came from low to middle income families. We gave our time to come experience and give and do something else and learn about the people that we were working with, and kind of implement a lot of that into what we brought back with us here in the States.
Okay. So going off of that, it sounds like you were able to surround yourself by like-minded people and basically get out of the program what you wanted to because you were making that decision. What did you do when, twofold question. So first of all, I know that sometimes Americans are perceived negatively abroad because of maybe a selfishness that comes out of it, or like a know-it-all attitude, or just low awareness. And so knowing that that's a perception, and knowing that you served with a wide variety of people, how did you handle presenting your American identity to people in an authentic way while trying to combat those stereotypes?
Definitely. That's a great question. So thankfully, the Peace Corps gives you during service a time of basically it's training. You get 3 months in-country training. Okay, at least the China sector did. You get 3 months of in-country training. Not only do you get language, you get TEFL, which is my background. I taught English as a foreign language at a teacher's college in my province of Guizhou. All right, but you also get 3 months of intensive diversity and inclusion. All right, why is this important? Because going as, like you would say, as Americans, and having that stereotype of Americans, it was important that the people in our community that we worked with knew that we were there to help them out on whatever it is that their needs were, and not to impose our American ideas of how something should work. Because if they had something that has worked for them since the dawn of age, we weren't there to change it. We were just there to help them implement it into their systems, implement it into their infrastructure. So that was our jobs over there as volunteers. All right. It wasn't, I'm American, I know better. This is how we do it back home. This is how we do it, y'all. No, it was none of that. It was, I'm here to best use me as a tool, utilize me and my background and my specialties in however you see fit. Give me the courses that you feel that I would be best at teaching, and that's how it works.
So personally, I don't really feel what I'm about to say here in South Florida, because I think our community is very diverse. But let's say we have someone who decides, let's say actually before the government decides to make the national service required. And so you have someone coming from, I don't know, the Midwest of the United States who they send to Uzbekistan. So do you think that the diversity training will help them to understand other cultures and be able to respect it? That training doesn't do that.
So it does, but it's like I said, a lot of things of like where they send people depends also on your background. They don't just say, I'm picking you out of a haystack. I'm sending you to the outmost far corner of the world where I know you don't speak the language. I know the culture is going to be such a shock to you that you're going to want to pack your bags and, find a way out. So it wouldn't be that way. It would be, a sort of infrastructure and then choosing, and then also people sitting around and looking at your background, your specialties and your fortes, and sending you into the areas and sectors that they feel that you are qualified for. All right. So I don't think it would work just necessarily that way, that, okay, I'm sending you out to Siberia.
Question from the Zoom. So we're curious about the other way around, right? Where something from my culture or my identity coming into this other culture is not generally accepted, and having to deal with that tension or non-acceptance, or how you would function inside of that community.
All right, I'm going to use an example from my experience in China. All right, a lot of what we look at society in China, and family is the biggest part of society in China, especially the role of women, and women, having to be married and have children and stuff like that. It was kind of a hard concept for one of my colleagues to understand why I didn't want to get married, why I didn't want to have children. So it was one thing that it would playfully go back and forth, like, I'm going to find you a good match at our next meeting, at our next family, wedding banquet. And I was like, okay, we'll see which one you get for me today. And so it was kind of like me playing it off of like, oh, no, my parents would never approve of that one. So, but we would make it in the sense of a friendly way of at the end of the day, they knew where I stood, and they were able to respect my point of view and my beliefs. And I wouldn't get upset about the fact that they continuously brought it up. Like if you're going to visit your grandmother, or if you're going home for the holidays saying, you're single. So that's extremely even taboo here. Your parents, especially come from a Latin family, your parents constantly ask you, so when are you going to get married? It's kind of the same thing over there. So they were able to accept my belief systems and my point of views. And I was able to kind of go back and forth and jokingly, like, all right, let's see who my next handsome bachelor is going to be for tonight's date. So it came off as that, mutual respect and understanding for each other.
That's a perfect example. And it reminds me of one of the opening goals of the Peace Corps that you were talking about, this idea of being an ambassador almost of America abroad. So you yourself are learning, but they are also learning about you. In the training portion of it, did they kind of prepare you for that? Is that something that they told you to look out for and gave you some
Yes, so they tell us about not necessarily, they don't go into the nitty-gritty of family and social rules to that extent, but, they do tell you to the point of, people here in China are very forward. They're going to tell you what's on their mind, and you better be ready for it. And these are the common ways or the most appropriate ways for you to respond in these situations, right? So we were prepared. It wasn't like we were caught off guard, which was good because I didn't go in like blindsided. But overall, my experience there was amazing. Okay, towards the end, the last semester of my time in China, I was able to create a women's empowerment group, and it was made up of the professional colleagues at my university. And we'd get together during dinners, during lunches, and usually we'd eat at restaurants or go to someone's house and cook. And everyone would get in the kitchen and cook their forte, this is my dish, my signature dish. And as we were doing that, we get into discussions of, our future, our professional goals, our lifelong dream, not just as the role of mother and wife, but as women, as professionals. What are some of the things that we wish we could achieve? And so it got to the point that this was discussed, that one of our fellow colleagues, applied for a fellowship in London, and we gave her the encouragement and the effort and the help that she needed in order to get into the fellowship. And during the pandemic, she was in London working on her fellowship. So this I feel was part of my legacy of what I left behind in China.
Okay, so since you are returning from the Peace Corps, I'm currently applying. I know the process is a little longer than I expected, but I wanted to ask you some questions on language inclusion and like emergence and stuff like that. I know that they give you 3 months of training, but how extensive and rigorous is that training, and were you able to communicate effectively with people that you were around in your sector?
So depending where your site is, depending where you're placed, goes hand in hand with the amount of hours and training that you get for that language. For example, I was in China. I got 5 days a week, about 3 to 4 hours a day of intensive conversational Chinese. So for 3.5 months, and it continued. At site, I also had a tutor. So I would say that my proficiency on standard Mandarin was great. I was able to get around, I was able to ask for directions, I was able to order food, which was important, because if not, I'd starve. But then once I got to site, like I said, my site is a small city, all right, in Guizhou, which has a lot of ethnic minority. They spoke a different type of dialect. So they couldn't understand sometimes that time my standard Mandarin, and I couldn't understand their dialect. But it got to a point where we worked around, and, after being there and experiencing and learning, it was a whole, like I said, learning experience. I was able to communicate with my cab drivers and tell them, or I was able to communicate with the bus drivers and tell them, is this the right place that I need to get to? Should I get off here? So that happened. It's a process of you just being able to accept and go along with what may come, and always have an open mind.
And were you able to, I know that you were able to communicate with them on a basic level, but were you able to ever have conversations, in Mandarin after a while?
Full-on discussions? No. I would have to pause and say, let me find the word for that. I don't know, because they say that in English, they would always tell me, oh, you guys have so many adjectives for everything. They're like, why do you use so many adjectives? I'm like, I'm trying to find the word to respond, describe that. And they're like, just say this. I'm like, but we use that for that. It's the same. It's one adjective for so yeah, after a while I was able to have, a certain degree of conversations, but not fluently. I had some cohort members who were able to, but then they'd also at site dedicated themselves to studying 2 to 3 hours a day at home, and they'd have tutors. So like I said, it's about how much you invest into it. You're welcome. Any other questions?
So how were you placed? What was that process like?
So it's a process of application. Once you get your application through, I decided where I wanted to go. I always knew I wanted to go to China. I always knew I wanted to teach English, right, at a university. So I've always had this passion about, I want to go to like the most, I guess, misunderstood place of what Americans misunderstand and, you know, see it for myself. I want to experience it myself, and that was one of my main reasons and decisions for going to China, right? And also because they had the teaching program, and my background came from teaching. So it is why I chose to go to China. And they placed me based on, here's the basic application. Where do you want to be placed? Where do you see yourself? What is the experiences and background that you have? So like she mentioned, the application portion of getting into the Peace Corps, and especially selecting, because I don't know if they still have that. I don't know if you're allowed to select where you go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a long process, and you get interviewed by different types of managers in those sectors that you're going to be working with. Like I got interviewed by the TEFL, which is the Teaching English as a Foreign Language Program Director from the Peace Corps in China. I get on the call with the country director and stuff like that. So they take their time in interviewing and picking exactly who they feel best fits that what they're looking for.
Okay, so two questions that we're going to kind of fold into one. The concept of like the sectors versus the place in the world where you want to get placed and where you want to serve. If we were to consider a conscripted national or international service, which one of those do you think is a better or more important, I don't know if that's the right word, indicator of how to go about doing that placement? The sector or the exposure of a certain place in the world? And then by extension, if we were going to talk about a national service, and if you know anything at all about AmeriCorps that you can share just so that there's an awareness of it as well. If we were going to say the same thing about the national service, right? Is it more of a kind of place or community that you would be interested in serving in, or do you think the priority should be in the sector and the work that you're actually doing?
Okay, I definitely believe, yeah, that's a lot of questions all in one, so let's try this. I definitely believe if it were a required mandatory volunteer service, that the age range should be between, yeah, that 18 to 24 of when people begin to be, start their service with either national or international. If it would be international, it would be a system similar to, basically, it would be the Peace Corps. Right, you would join the Peace Corps, and at that age range, it should be college graduates. It is important for people that do international work and international service to have some sort of knowledge, some sort of background in order to better serve. As far as national work, I do believe that the best age range for that is fresh out of high school. You get to look around and learn about basically your community. And programs like that exist. You have VISTA, you have AmeriCorps, you have Teach for America. If you decide to do education and you want some time off and you want to teach at inner city schools, Teach for America is also a great project. It's a volunteer-based project. All right. So AmeriCorps is kind of similar to the Peace Corps. You serve in different types of sectors, as in agriculture, as in medical, as in educational, as in infrastructure, as in agriculture. I mentioned agriculture, but different types of sectors, and the interviewing process and the process of how they recruit people is based on your background and your experience and your basically qualifications of how you best fit and serve those areas. So I would suggest it. You know, it's kind of what we have set up now, just not mandatory.
So the follow-up, just because it was like 5 questions rolled into one, right? In considering the application process, especially if it was a required national or international service, do you think it's more important in the placement process to think about the kind of work, right, the sector, or the community and the culture and the place that you're going to. So it sounded like your motivation was absolutely the place, and then the sector almost came secondary. Secondary. So, just, of your personal opinion.
Okay, I think definitely that they should have the qualifications in the background to fill that sector. All right, everything else that comes along with having to be posted there, because my post in China wasn't necessarily the easiest. The cultures are extremely different. You have to get accustomed to a lot of the ways that things are done, you know. So I definitely think filling the requirement of whether it's education, whether it's agriculture, whether it's medical, depending on what field, you should be able to fill those requirements first. Why? Because if you go into, and I had this maybe from one or two colleagues or fellow cohort members in China, that they had a basis of maybe small amounts of training and education before they came to the Peace Corps in China. And once they got there, at times they felt frustrated or overwhelmed with the amount of, work and duties that we had. So those that didn't have like traditional training in education kind of had a rough time, and they spent a lot of their time figuring out what their lessons are going to be for the week and finding new projects and finding new ideas and activities for their classes. So it consumed a lot of their time, whereas I had a good amount of background in education. So for me, it was kind of a breeze, and I was able to have a lot more fun with my students and, bring them such entertaining and richful lessons and activities that we both enjoyed it. We had time that I didn't have to spend lesson planning, bonding with lunch, with dinners, and activities that they'd invite us to. So I would definitely suggest that if that were something that would be implemented, then filling the sector and having the qualifications to fill that sector.
What sectors can you volunteer in?
If we're talking about the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, well, both of them have pretty much the same amount of sectors. So you have different types of sectors. There are for teaching, there's agriculture. There's also like peer youth groups that you can work in. All right. There is, if you have like medical experience, medical backgrounds, there is also medical fields that you can work in. There's transportation infrastructure, there's different types of engineering, and these are for returned Peace Corps volunteers that want to go and volunteer again. The opportunities are just enormous. There was even one that I saw before leaving to the Peace Corps that I'd say, wow, if I was a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I would have liked to do that. It was with the government of Mexico. They were looking for an anthropologist to work at their museum for 6 months, to help them implement how better to cater, what they had to offer to the outside world, to tourists, basically. So I thought to myself, wow, that would have been an amazing program for me to join if I would have been a returned Peace Corps volunteer.
So just to follow up, because I'm interested in global health, so is there an opportunity to do either health education with a specific community or maybe infrastructure, so trying to help like a city implement a better water management system, for example?
Definitely. There definitely is. There's a lot of programs, especially in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, that look at AIDS awareness, right? Because that's big over there. And so,
If I can just do a quick selfish plug here. Whoop. So the Peace Corps Prep Program is structured around building the experience, curricular and co-curricular, to make you the best possible applicant for the Peace Corps. And it's structured around the 6 sectors of the Peace Corps. I think the only one that we didn't mention that sounds like it would include a lot of the things that you were just talking about now is community and economic development. I'm hearing my own echo. Yeah, and again, all of the placements are kind of like driven by the sectors and the places where they are. So if you want some more information about the Peace Corps Prep Program as an undergraduate student, absolutely visit goglobal.fiu.edu. Email me at pcprep@fiu.edu, or just pass by the office and give any of us a chat.
All right? Thank you so much.
Jam, thanks so much for coming today and sharing your experiences and insights, and obviously getting some of us motivated to get out there and volunteer ourselves. That's amazing. I'm going to take this off really quickly because my glasses tend to fog up. Since this is the last Tuesday Times Roundtable of this semester, we wanted to offer some special thanks to those who have made these sessions possible. First, we'd like to thank the Student Government Association for making it possible for us to host the TTR right here in GC 150. Thank you, SGA. Woo! Another thank you goes to our partner, the New York Times, and its representative, Lucia Robles, for providing lunch to our in-person attendees each week. Yay! We'd also like to thank Hilda Aguirre and the Media Tech team for working to make our video recordings of these sessions so professional. And thank you, Richard, who's been one of our regulars here. If you'd like to catch those recordings, we do post them weekly on the Office of Global Learning Initiatives YouTube channel. I'm sure if you've had one or more of our lunches, as we mentioned previously, that Jill and Gutentag and the crew in Panther Catering have put together, I know you'd like to join us in thanking Panther Catering. And finally, last but certainly not least, are the Graham Center's audiovisual techs, led by Rigo Campos and Andre Rodriguez. They have done an excellent job of making the voices of our presenters, such as Jam, heard each week, and we wanted to thank them for that. Awesome. And thanks to all of you who have joined us this semester. I hope you're already getting excited about next semester, at least once you've gotten through your final exams. So thanks for being here, you guys.